Hi children, I am going to start a new lesson. The title of the lesson is Impact of Colonialism in India. As you know, the Britishers ruled over India for more than 2 centuries. And what was the impact of this colonialism in India? Mostly on the forests, on the tribal people, and also on industries in India. In this lesson, we are going to learn about how forest, industrial, and labor policies affected the lives of the people. And throughout the country, now first let us see how forests were used before British rule. From the beginning, the Adivasis and the tribals or villagers living in and around the forest, they enjoyed the forest wealth. Freely they enjoyed the forest wealth. Whatever forest produce they needed, they used to take it from the forest and they enjoyed freely. They used to take all the things that they needed from the forest. And in fact, they were like owners of the forest at that time. And apart from enjoying the forest products like fruits, flowers, tubers, timber, these people use forests as grazing grounds for their cattle also. And in some parts of the forest, they cut down the trees and burned down the trees and cleared the forest to cultivate crops. As you know, it is called as shifting cultivation. And they used to follow the shifting cultivation in these forest areas and cultivate crops. They also cut down trees to build their homes and to make some implements which they needed. Only if they wanted to buy something from the market like salt or iron, they used to sell the forest produce in exchange for what they wanted from the market. And they never sold forest produce to earn profits. Only when they needed anything from the market, they used to sell this forest produce in exchange for what they needed from the market. And they never sold forest produce to earn profits. The farmers and the Adivasis not only used the forest products, but also they protected the forests. And whenever they needed wood for any purpose, for building a hut or for building their home, for anything they needed, they took all the care to see that only the old trees are cut down. Always they used to cut down only the old trees and they allowed new trees to grow. And they never cut large tracts of forests. But only small patches of forest were cleared by them. Even for shifting cultivation, they used to clear only small patches of forest so that the forest would not be destroyed. And many a times, these people living near forests used to give valuable gifts to the kings and emperors, like ivory, animal skins, honey, etc. Whatever they gathered from the forest, out of those valuable products, they were given as gifts to the kings and emperors. And sometimes they used to pay taxes also to the kings for using forest land for cultivation. Because they are doing shifting cultivation in some forest area, so they used to pay taxes also to the kings for using that forest land for cultivation. And they used to follow shifting cultivation. And as long as there was no danger to the security of their kingdoms, the kings and the emperors did not try to control their activities. They never imposed any restrictions on them. They never made any laws. No restrictions were imposed on them regarding their movement or regarding their use of forests. No restrictions were imposed on them because as long as they did not cause any danger, they did not cause any harm to the security of the kingdom, they were left free. They were given full freedom to enjoy the forest wealth. So, for many centuries, the Adivasis, they protected and enjoyed the forest wealth. Now, so far we learned how the forests were used before the British rule. Now, let us see how forests were used during British rule. How they exploited the forest wealth. The Britishers, how they exploited the forest wealth. As you know, the British laid down the railways in India to facilitate their own transport of goods. For the first time, railway line was laid down by the Britishers only during the time of Dalhousie. And the first railway line was laid down in 1853 between Bombay and Thane by Dalhousie, and from then onwards, the British started laying thousands of kilometers of railway lines throughout the country. And huge ships were also built for cheap water transport. They needed ships for water transport because at that time the main source of transport was water transport only. It was the cheapest way of transporting. And for all this, they needed large quantities of wood for building railway lines, and also for building ships. They needed large quantities of wood. And to lay railway lines, they needed sleepers. You can see these sleepers in the photo. To keep the railway tracks intact, sleepers are used in between. Between the railway tracks, these sleepers are used. And in 1879, there were 8,000 kilometers of railway lines, which increased to 50,000 kilometers by 1910. And like this, each year, almost 1 crore wooden sleepers were needed to lay down these railway tracks. And wood for these sleepers was cut down from the Himalayan forest and Terai region in the northern plains. And for building mines, do you know how they used to transport this wood? You can see in the previous picture here, see, in the Himalayan region, almost during winter season, all the rivers are frozen. And on these frozen rivers, the logs of timber are cut down and they are arranged just like this, as you can see in the photo. And when summer sets in, the temperature increases, then the water starts melting. And then these logs of wood, they are automatically carried away by the river to the factories. That means without paying a single pai for transport, they used to make this arrangement for transporting these logs of timber to the factories. Now, wood for these sleepers was cut down from the Himalayan forest and Terai region in the northern place, and as I told you, these logs of wood, they were flown to the factories without paying any transport charges. And for building mines and for making ships also, wood was cut down from the forest. And for this, workers were hired by timber traders and forest contractors. And with this timber trade, the British government and the companies also earned much profits by auctioning the contracts for cutting down the forest. They used to auction the contracts, and whoever bid the highest contract, they were given the contract of cutting down the forest. And thus the company and also the government earned much profits through this timber trade. Now, day to day, day by day and year by year also, this trade in timber increased because they were laying down thousands of kilometers of railway lines. They were building ships for transport. So this trade in timber increased. And now the British government was worried about forests. If the forests are cut down so rapidly for their needs, forests will disappear soon. And how would they get wood for their future railway lines or ships, etc.? So, to ensure a regular supply of wood, the British government decided to plant new trees. Because if all the forests are cut down like this rapidly, recklessly, for their present needs, how can they get wood for their future needs? So they decided to plant new trees to replace the disappearing forests. And that too, the British government wanted to plant only trees that provide timber for their uses, but not the trees which are useful to the people, like mango, mahua, neem trees. They are useful to the trees, but they never wanted to grow these trees. They only planted trees like teak and pine, which provide them timber. Now, setting up of a forest department by the British government in India. Now, since the British government started planting new trees and new forests, it set up a forest department in 1864. The forest department was set up in India in 1864 by the British government to protect these new forests, because now they started planting new trees, and when they grow, it will become a forest. So to protect these new forests, they set up a forest department in 1864. And the forest department made new laws to protect the forests. These are to be protected from the people who are living in and around the forest. And these laws also insisted on cutting down the old forests carefully so that they will not disappear completely. While cutting down the old forests also, people must be very careful. In such a way, the laws were made by the forest department. And now, the forest department felt the need to protect the forest from Adivasis, tribals who were living near the forest. They felt that they are causing much harm to the forest because they are enjoying all the forest wealth, forest produce. So they felt that the forest must be protected from these Adivasis and tribals or farmers who are living near the forest. Now we are going to enter into the most important part of the lesson, that is revolts. Adivasis revolts. The conditions of the Adivasi farmers were worsened during the British rule. The Baiga, Muria, Gond and Bhil tribes of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh and Koya, Kolam and Reddy tribes of Andhra Pradesh and Savora tribes of Odisha, all these tribals, they were no longer allowed to do shifting cultivation in the forest areas. As I told you, these tribal people, they practice shifting cultivation. And already we know what is shifting cultivation. For 2 or 3 years, they clear one part, small part of the forest area and they grow crops. And when the soil loses its natural fertility, they shift their cultivation to other place. And again the same procedure is followed. It is called shifting cultivation. And these tribals, they were not allowed to do shifting cultivation in the forest areas. And now they had to work as, because now they cannot do shifting cultivation. What is the source of livelihood for these people? So now they had to work as laborers, either for the forest department or for contractors. They were forced to work either for the forest department or for the contractors. And not only this, they had to become bonded laborers. These people who were not allowed to do shifting cultivation, these tribal people, they had to become bonded laborers to these contractors and forest department. For money lenders, also they had to become bonded laborers, because as they could not enjoy the forest wealth or do shifting cultivation, they were forced to take loans from the money lenders. And when they could not repay these loans, they had to become bonded laborers. So thus they were forced to work as bonded laborers for the money lenders or the contractors or the forest department. Now in course of time, outsiders came and settled in these areas where the Adivasis and tribal people were living. In those areas, these outsiders, they settled and they started dominating. Where these Adivasis were living, they started living there and they gradually took away their lands by force. By force, they took away the lands of the Adivasis and the tribals, and the atrocities of the forest department also were increasing. Imposing fines for nothing at all, imposing fines for each and everything, beating them up for minor mistakes, forcibly entering into their houses, taking away their things, misbehaving with women, taking bribes for everything, and above all this, getting beggar means free labor. Beggar means free labor, getting free labor done by those tribal people without giving any wages to them. It became very common and routine in those days. Even the forest department officials and the outsiders who came and settled there, they started all these atrocities against the tribal people who were living near the forest. And against these circumstances and harassments, the Adivasis protested in many places. And during their protests, they used to burn down many police stations, houses of the money lenders, posts of the forest department, and sometimes in frustration they used to set fire to the entire jungle also. For example, Santals of Jharkhand in 1856, Koyas of Andhra Pradesh in 1880 and 1922, and Maria and Muria tribes Adivasis of Bastar district in 1910, Gond and Kolam Adivasis in 1940. They led protests in different places at different times against these atrocities by the forest department, because they were not given their rights over the forest. They protested against it. Now in 1855-56, there was a great revolt of Santals. Santals, they belong to Jharkhand. They are tribal people. They belong to Jharkhand, and there was a great revolt of these Santals in Jharkhand. And in this revolt, the Santals started looting and killing the Jamindars and moneylenders also. They killed many zamindars and they looted them. Their wealth was looted by these people, and they killed many money lenders and zamindars also. And because zamindars, they were exploiting them, and money lenders, they were also exploiting them. They were making them into bonded laborers. So they started killing both the zamindars and the money lenders. And the Santals also declared that the British rule had come to an end in India, and Santals are going to establish a free state of Santals. And Santals had only bows and arrows as their weapons. Because they are tribal people, they had only bows and arrows as their weapons, whereas the British had guns. So these Santals could not withstand the British army. And at the end of a first battle, 15,000 Santals were killed. And finally, the revolt was suppressed by the British. That is about Santal revolt. Now let us see about another revolt, which is Birsa Munda revolt. What was it? This Birsa Munda revolt was led between 1874 to 1901. 1874 to 1901, Birsa Munda revolt was led by the Munda Adivasis of Chhattisgarh, Chota Nagpur region. Munda Adivasis of Chota Nagpur region, and these Adivasis led a revolt under the leadership of Birsa Munda. Birsa Munda was their leader, so the revolt came to be known as Birsa Munda revolt. To drive away the Britishers, they started this Birsa Munda revolt. They wanted to put an end to the British government as it was supporting zamindars and money lenders who were exploiting them, and also the courts of law. And because of all these zamindars, money lenders and courts of law, they deprived the tribals of their lands and their rights over the forest. They were not given their rights over the forest. So they revolted against these people under the leadership of Birsa Munda. And Birsa Munda was arrested, and by the British he was arrested and he was imprisoned. And while in prison only he died. In 1900 he died. And after his death, the government made some laws protecting the rights of the Adivasis of Chota Nagpur. Just like to satisfy these tribal people to some extent, a little attempt was made by the government. The government made some laws protecting the rights of the Adivasis of Chota Nagpur region. And another revolt is Kumaon revolt. Kumaon region, it is in Uttarakhand state, and this Kumaon revolt was led from 1921 to 22. And in this region, the farmers refused to cooperate with the forest department, as the forest department deprived them of their rights over the forest. Their main anger was against the forest department, because since the forest department was established in 1864, the department itself did not allow the people to have their rights over the forest. So in the Kumaon region, the farmers refused to cooperate with the forest department, as the forest department deprived them of their rights over the forest. And they openly broke the rules of the forest department. And they also refused to do forced labor for the forest department. And after this type of opposition from the farmers, the British government made its rules less strict. Just like after Birsa Munda revolt, some of the laws were made to protect the Adivasis. In the same way, after this revolt, after this type of opposition from the farmers, the British government made its rules less strict. And the next was Alluri Sita Ramaraju. A revolt and a movement was led by Alluri Sita Ramaraju. This everyone knows, I think. Alluri Sita Ramaraju was born on 4th July 1897 in Pandangi village in Visakhapatnam district. And Sita Ramaraju, he lost his father in his childhood, only when he was in school. Then he lost his father, and he was brought up by his uncle Ramachandra Raju. And in 1882, the Madras Forest Act was passed. In 1882, the Madras Forest Act was passed, and according to this act, many restrictions were imposed on the free movement of the tribal people in the forest. This Madras Forest Act imposed many restrictions on the free movement of the tribal people in the forest. And also, they were not allowed to do Podu shifting cultivation. In Andhra Pradesh, the shifting cultivation is called Podu. So, these people, tribal people, were not allowed to do Podu shifting cultivation in forest areas. And against these policies of the British government, Alluri Sita Ramaraju led a protest movement in East Godavari and Visakhapatnam districts. And as part of this movement, Sita Ramaraju raided many police stations in Chintapalli, Rampachodavaram, Krishnadevipeta, Addatigala, Narsipatnam, and he killed many British officers. And he took away guns and ammunition from the police stations for future use in wars. If whenever needed, he can use those weapons. So he took many guns and ammunition from the police stations. He raided many number of police stations. He used to give them prior information that he is going to raid the police station, and then he used to raid. In spite of that, the police department could not do anything. When he raided the police stations, he killed many of the officers and then British officers who were on duty, and he took away the guns and the ammunition from the police stations. And in December 1922, the British sent a company of Assam Rifles under the leadership of Saunders. And Ramaraju continued his fight with the tribal volunteers using bows and arrows under the leadership of Mallu Dora and Gantam Dora. Under the leadership of Mallu Dora and Gantam Dora, Sita Ramaraju continued his fight with the tribal volunteers against the British government. And after 1 year almost, Ramaraju was stabbed by the British in the forests of Chintapalli near Narsipatnam, and he was shot dead near Mampa village. This Mampa village is near Krishnadevipeta. Now Komaram Bhim. Komaram Bhim, he was born in Sankepalli village in Adilabad district. Born in Sankepalli village in Adilabad district, and when he was just 15 years old, his father was killed by the forest department in an attack. In an attack which was done by the forest department, his father was killed when he was just 15 years old. And he was leading his life by shifting cultivation, by doing some shifting cultivation to maintain his family, because now he was the only son, so he had to maintain the family. So to maintain his family, he started doing shifting cultivation. And then Siddiqui, he was an informer of Nizam government, secret informer. And this Siddiqui, he occupied his land. Siddiqui, who was an informer of Nizam, he came and occupied Komaram Bhim's land. And in anger and frustration, Komaram Bhim killed Siddiqui because he was too young, and in a frustration and a rage of anger, he killed Siddiqui. And to escape from the police, he went to hide in Assam. He escaped to Assam to hide from the police. And there he started working as a laborer in tea and coffee plantations. And while working as a laborer, he came across many agitations by the laborer. He saw how the agitations are led by the laborer to get their demands fulfilled while working in the tea plantations. And he learned how to read and write also. And though he was in Assam, he was being informed of the situation in his native place by his close friend Komaram Suru. Komaram Suru, he was his close friend, and he used to inform him all the situation which is all that is going to take place in his native place, and all the atrocities or harassments by the government. He used to inform him. And Bhim was inspired by the agitations and movements of Alluri Sita Ramaraju for freedom, and also by Birsa Munda revolt. Birsa Munda revolt also inspired him very much. And inspired by these two movements, he also started a fight against the British government. At that time, Nizam's government was collecting two taxes. At that time, Nizam's government was collecting two taxes, and these two taxes were Bambram. One was Bambram for grazing cattle. They had to pay tax Bambram. And Dhupa Petti, it was also a tax for collecting firewood for cooking. If they collected any firewood for cooking from the forest, they had to pay tax called Dhupa Petti. So Bambram for grazing cattle and Dhupa Petti for collecting firewood for cooking. These two taxes were being collected. And Komaram Bhim came back to support the people. He gave the slogan Jal Jangal Jameen to oppose the taxes by the Nizam and to fight for freedom and rights of the tribals. He gave the slogan Jal Jangal Jameen. Jal Jangal Jameen means water, forest and land. These are natural resources and everyone has rights over these. So no one can restrict them enjoying these resources. Adivasis were very much impressed by this slogan, and Komaram Bhim formed a guerrilla army with the young men of Koya and Gondu tribes. He gathered all the young men from Koya and Gondu tribes and he formed a guerrilla army to fight with the Nizam. And he gave them training how to fight with weapons. Now his army was ready, he was ready to fight. Now Bhim started his guerrilla fight at a place called Jode Ghat. His fight with the Nizam was started at a place called Jode Ghat, and finally he was killed in the battle. While fighting only, he was killed in the battlefield by the Nizam army. And after his death, Nizam appointed Hemant to do research on the life of tribal people. To do some kind of research on the life of tribal people, Hemant he was appointed by the Nizam. And he completed his research, and 2 years back only he died. And it was shown on TV also, you might have seen. Now I conclude here. I will continue in the next video.